You ever read your own name in a newspaper and feel like the world got it just a little wrong? That's how it felt, standing in my kitchen that morning, hands shaking only slightly as I clicked "Submit" on June's obituary. Not from grief, though the ache was still raw and real, no, it was from something else. Something colder. Something sharper. Satisfaction. It wasn't a fancy obituary. I didn't see the point. Just her name, her years, and a short paragraph that boiled a life of resilience into black and white lines. June Mercer, 69, died peacefully at her farmhouse in Stillwater. Survived by her brother Ray Mercer, retired logistics manager, and several nieces and nephews. Peacefully. That part was true. If anyone earned a quiet exit, it was June. She was the kind of sister who kept a little bourbon in the cupboard even after the doctor said not to, who knew how to rebuild a carburetor better than most of the mechanics I'd worked with in my 30s, and who never once made me feel like a failure when my own son, Caleb, cut me off like a gangrenous limb. 14 years of silence. That's how long it had been since I heard Caleb's voice with anything other than contempt laced into it. He walked away at 26, just after his mother died. Took a job in L.A., married a woman named Natalie who looked at me like I'd crawled out of a ditch, and started making real money, or so he claimed. He called once after the funeral. I didn't answer. June was the one who picked me up after that. The one who came around with fresh cornbread and silence when I needed it most. The best revenge, she used to say, is to outlive them and outthink them. It became our toast. Her words, not mine. I was never the vengeful type, until I learned how sharp silence can be. It was about an hour after the obituary went live that the message came in. A text. Coming to the funeral. Hope that's okay. Caleb. No, Dad. No, sorry. Just that. I stared at it for a second longer than I should have. Then I deleted it. No response. No reaction. But I smiled. Everything was right on time. You don't survive 40 years in freight and logistics without learning a thing or two about timing. Routes, shipments, customs clearance delays, every piece of the puzzle matters. And if you're good, if you're real good, you learn how to make problems solve themselves before they even know they exist. I learned how to live with being forgotten. How to become invisible without disappearing. And now, I was back in focus. June didn't have many friends left, but the few she did have would come. Folks from church. A couple of her old poker buddies. The funeral home had a little chapel with hard-backed pews and dusty hymnals from the 80s. She wouldn't have wanted more. I poured myself a cup of black coffee and stepped out onto the back porch. The wind was coming off the cornfields with that early October bite that meant winter was waking up somewhere over the ridge. I stood there in my worn flannel, letting the breeze push into the seams of my sleeves, and thought about all the years I'd spent trying not to be bitter. Bitter's easy. Quiet is harder. It takes discipline to wait. Behind me, inside the house, was a safe I hadn't opened in 4 months. Inside were deeds, copies of court documents, and a will, freshly updated, that June had helped me write. She was sharp until the end, sharp enough to know what I was preparing for. She never asked why. Just nodded and said, "Make sure it counts." I had. People like Caleb think legacy is a bank account. A brand. An image. But legacy is what you leave behind in the people who knew you best. And June knew me better than anyone. I stayed out there for a while, watching the barn roof glint in the sun. It was old and rusted, same as me, but still standing. Still holding. That afternoon, I called the funeral home. Confirmed the time. Made sure there'd be an extra usher. I had a gut feeling the guest list was going to get complicated. By evening, I'd gotten 4 more messages from Caleb. One of them actually said, "Looking forward to reconnecting. It's been too long." I laughed out loud at that one. Not because it was funny, but because it sounded like a line from a real estate pitch. Polished. Practiced. Useless. I didn't reply to that one either. Didn't need to. I already had what I needed, the silence between us was broken. He'd made the first move. That meant the board was set. And I'd already made mine, months ago. I pulled out the guest list I'd scribbled on a yellow legal pad. June's funeral wasn't going to be about grief. Not for me. It was going to be the first domino. I slept well that night. The best sleep I'd had since July, when I finalized the transfer of a certain property deed in Scottsdale. You see, Caleb thought I was still the same old man he left behind. He thought he could walk back in with a soft smile and firm handshake and reel me in like one of his clients. But Caleb forgot something important. You don't get to pick and choose your blood when it suits your story. And when you've burned every bridge, don't act surprised when the only road back is paved with traps. He showed up late, of course. Not so late that it would raise eyebrows, but just enough to make a statement, the kind of entrance you make when you want the attention without looking like you're asking for it. Caleb always had that gift. A toe over the line but never the whole foot. I was standing outside the chapel, greeting a few of June's old neighbors, when I saw the silver Audi glide up the gravel drive like it was allergic to dust. I recognized it before I recognized the man behind the wheel. When Caleb stepped out, I could tell the years had been good to him. Too good. He had that curated tan, the kind you get from afternoons at boutique golf courses, not from labor under the sun. His hair was trimmed close at the sides, styled on top, and his suit, charcoal gray, probably custom, fit him too well to be off the rack. Natalie stepped out next. Still thin. Still flawless. Still looking at the world like it owed her a refund. Her heels crunched on the gravel as she took his arm, her designer clutch barely big enough for a phone and a few well-placed lies. I didn't move. Just watched them approach. Caleb spotted me and offered a smile. It wasn't sheepish. It wasn't warm. It was polished, the same one he probably used on investors or potential partners. Teeth straight. Eyes soft. Manufactured sincerity. "Dad," he said. I nodded. "Caleb." He opened his arms like we were about to hug. I didn't move. His arms stalled midair before he dropped them with practiced grace. No embarrassment. Just a slight adjustment of posture, like he expected resistance and was ready to pivot. "This is Natalie," he said, unnecessarily. "We've met," I replied. Natalie's smile was tight, eyes scanning the chapel and the rolling fields beyond like she was already appraising the place. Her gaze lingered on June's farmhouse, the wraparound porch freshly painted last spring, and then moved to the barn in the distance. "Beautiful out here," she said, voice sugary. "I can see why you'd want to stay." I didn't respond. I didn't have to. The land spoke for itself. Caleb rubbed the back of his neck. "It's been a long time," he said. "Too long." 14 years, I answered, not as a correction, but a confirmation. He nodded, lips pressing together. "I've thought about this day a lot," he said, glancing at the chapel doors. "Never thought it would be like this. No one ever does." We walked in together, side by side, but not shoulder to shoulder. He led Natalie to a pew near the front, putting on the performance of a grieving nephew. I stayed back, shaking hands, accepting hugs, nodding along as folks offered condolences. June's friends, most of them old farmers and retired schoolteachers, didn't seem impressed by the prodigal son's return. A few looked him up and down like they were trying to remember if he'd ever lifted a shovel. He hadn't. The service was simple. A few hymns, a eulogy from her friend Marlene, and a slideshow of old photos. Caleb sat quietly, his head bowed, fingers laced in his lap like a politician at a public vigil. Natalie dabbed her eyes with a tissue she never actually used. I watched more than I listened. Caleb's eyes weren't on the coffin. They were scanning the crowd, the rafters, the woodwork, the land visible through the stained glass windows. Every now and then he'd nod, like he was doing the math in his head. After the service, there was a small gathering at the farmhouse. We served coffee, pie, and ham sandwiches the way June would have liked. Caleb stood by the fireplace, talking to anyone who'd listen. He had that way about him, charming, inquisitive, never quite saying too much. He laughed at just the right pitch, asked the right questions, and offered compliments that sounded sincere even though they weren't. I watched Natalie drift through the rooms like she was casing the place. Her fingers brushed along the bookshelves, the antique table, the window ledge with the old mason jars. She paused at a photo of June and me standing in front of the barn, one arm around each other, both of us grinning like fools in the sun. She turned to me. "You've really built something here, Ray." "June built it," I said. "I just kept it going." She smiled. "Still, it's impressive." I gave her nothing. Later, when the sun was dropping behind the hills and the guests had thinned out, Caleb stepped out onto the porch with me. We stood in silence for a few minutes, watching the wind ripple through the fields. The turbine blades on the edge of the property turned slowly, slicing the sky. "Lot of land out here," he said. 140 acres. He nodded. "Wind leases must be solid." "Better than trucking ever was," I said. He laughed softly. "You've done well. I've done quiet." He turned to face me. "Dad, I know we've been apart, and I know that's mostly on me. But I'd like to talk about legacy. About the future." There it was. The bait. I met his gaze. "I thought you might." And just like that, the trap began to close. If grief had a smell, it would be old wood and black coffee. That's what the farmhouse held the next morning. June's casserole dishes were still stacked by the sink, rinsed but not washed. Her favorite cardigan was still hanging by the door. The porch swing creaked just once in the breeze, like it was waiting for her to return and finish a conversation. She wouldn't. But someone else had. Caleb was already there when I came down the stairs. He was in the kitchen, standing like he'd grown up in that house, which he hadn't, pouring coffee from the same kettle June had used every Sunday. He looked comfortable. That was deliberate. "Hope it's okay," he said, setting a second mug on the table like he had the right. "Didn't want to wake you." "You didn't," I replied. I was already up. He nodded and took a sip, eyes scanning the old cabinets, the pine table, the ceramic rooster clock on the wall. Natalie appeared a few minutes later, barefoot, a cream-colored sweater pulled over what looked like designer sleepwear. Even relaxed, she looked like she was selling something. They settled in across from me at the table like we were a family. We weren't. "Mom loved this kitchen," Caleb said. "I remember how the light used to come in through that window in the mornings." "That was June's window," I corrected. "Your mom preferred the porch." Natalie smiled at that. "It really is a beautiful home. And the land, Ray, it's rare to see property like this still in a family." Still in a family. The phrase curled in my ear like a warning. Caleb didn't jump in right away. He let her plant the seed first. Then he leaned forward, palms flat on the table. "I meant what I said yesterday. I know we've been distant, and I carry that. But I also see now what you've built here, and what it could mean for the future." "What future's that?" I asked, tone flat. "Ours," he said. "Legacy, Dad. Family roots. I want Jackson to know where he comes from." I said nothing. The silence did more than words could. Natalie filled the space. "He's been thinking about this for a while. Ever since the business, well, since it shifted directions." Shifted directions. That was a pretty euphemism for burned down. Caleb cleared his throat. "We've been through some rough patches. The market turned on us, we were overextended. But we're bouncing back. That's why being here, with you, it's grounding. I looked him in the eye. You need money. He blinked, caught mid-sentence. What? You need money. You didn't come back for a second chance. You came back because the accounts are drying up. The room went still. Even the rooster clock seemed to pause. I'm not accusing, I said, voice steady. Just stating the obvious. Caleb shifted in his chair. Natalie leaned back, crossing her legs, eyes narrowing just a touch. Look, he said, recovering fast. I won't pretend everything's perfect. We've had some setbacks. But we've also got opportunities. There's a chance for us to turn things around, to rebuild. With some help. Help, I repeated. I'm not asking for a handout, he said quickly. I'm talking about partnership. Investment. Something smart. Something with returns. Returns, I said, drawing the word out like it had a bad aftertaste. Outside, the wind picked up. The turbine blades began to turn again. He leaned in. You've really built something here, Dad. The land, the leases, the farmhouse. It's incredible. You're sitting on something that could take our whole family to the next level. What level's that? He smiled. And there it was again, that same smooth, practiced, too-white smile he wore at the funeral. I'd seen him working the room that day. He hadn't cried. Not even once. But he had hugged the right people. Laughed in the right places. Complimented June's friend Marlene on her eulogy with a hand on her shoulder and just the right amount of eye contact. He worked that chapel like a fundraiser. I had watched from the back, hands folded, as my son, the one who hadn't called in 14 years, collected names, traded smiles, and studied every inch of land visible from those tall stained glass windows. He wasn't grieving. He was gathering intel. Natalie had done the same. I saw her standing at the edge of the cemetery after the burial, eyes not on June's headstone but on the property line. She traced the fence with her gaze, probably calculating acreage. The wind caught her scarf and for a moment she looked like a ghost, elegant, hollow, drifting towards something she didn't build but desperately wanted to own. Now here they were, selling legacy like it came with a business plan. You've got wind leases, Caleb said. That alone's worth, what? 7 figures over 10 years. I didn't answer. And this land, 140 acres. In a state with no income tax and renewable incentives. You could retire 10 times over. I'm already retired, I said. Quietly. On purpose. Natalie tilted her head. But legacy isn't just about retiring, Ray. It's about what you leave behind. I looked at her for a long moment. Then back to Caleb. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a slim folder. I put something together. Just a starting point. Numbers, projections, a possible path forward. I didn't reach for it. He set it down carefully on the table. Just think about it. I looked at the folder, then at them. Their posture. Their polish. The subtle desperation wrapped in charm. And then I smiled. Don't worry, I said. I brought a folder too. I let him talk. That's what you do with people like Caleb. You let the silence grow tall around them, and eventually, they'll try to fill it, with plans, promises, and just enough lies to keep themselves convinced they're still in control. We sat in the den that night. Natalie had gone upstairs early, claiming a headache, but I knew it was strategy. She wanted Caleb to take the lead. Let him be the vulnerable one, the fallen son, the man looking to rebuild. They knew how to play their roles. He had the folder open on the coffee table between us. A clean PowerPoint printout, charts and bullet points, everything color-coded like some pitch deck you'd give to a venture capitalist, not your father. Not the man you hadn't spoken to in over a decade. I know it looks bad, Caleb said, flipping to a page labeled Current Liabilities, but this is just a temporary dip. The lawsuits aren't about fraud, they're breach of contract disputes. Standard stuff in this space. I didn't answer. Just let him keep digging. We had some vendor fallouts, he went on. Some marketing firms didn't deliver, some clients pulled out mid-campaign. But we've still got the IP, we've got branding, and more importantly, we've got the contacts. The network. What we're missing is liquidity. Liquidity. The way he said it, you'd think it was a vitamin deficiency. So here's the ask, he said, flipping to the last page like it was the grand finale of a magic trick. 250,000. Bridge capital. You don't have to wire it all at once, we can structure it quarterly. I'll give you equity. Board oversight. Hell, you could even sit in on strategy calls if you want. He smiled, the same one he used when trying to charm his way into a business lunch or a country club membership. It didn't quite reach his eyes. I picked up the folder. Turned a few pages. I didn't ask questions about the legal notices. I already knew the answers. Didn't ask about the former employees suing for unpaid wages, or the photos I'd found of him and his business partner laughing it up in Cancun 2 months after the company tanked. Instead, I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and came back with my own folder. It was thicker. Brown manila. No glossy printouts. Just paper. Paper with weight. I set it down in front of him and slid it across the table. He looked at it like it might bite him. "What's this?" he asked. "Open it." He flipped it open and froze. First page, a printout of a public court filing, Maricopa County. Plaintiff, Centennial Creative. Defendant, Caleb Mercer. Allegation, misappropriation of funds and breach of fiduciary duty. The complaint had 2 pages of itemized charges. He flipped to the next one, a notice of default from a commercial landlord in Tempe. Then another, a letter from the Arizona Department of Revenue, outlining back taxes owed. "You've been busy," I said, tone even. He flipped again. A photo this time, him at a rooftop bar, holding a cigar, clinking glasses with a man named Travis Harlow. Travis was the same business partner currently suing him. "You hired a PI?" he asked, voice quieter now. "No need. I just paid attention." He looked up at me, jaw clenched. But I wasn't done. The next document was the kicker, a deed transfer. Scottsdale, Arizona. Unit 1502. A sleek little condo with a view of Camelback Mountain. His condo. Except it wasn't his anymore. "I bought it 2 months ago," I said. "Foreclosure sale. Bank didn't even call you first. You were behind 6 months. I let them believe I was an investment firm looking for a flip." His mouth opened. Then closed. His fingers went pale, gripping the edge of the folder. "You son of a..." "No," I said. "You don't get to play angry. Not in my house." He stared down at the deed like it had stabbed him. "You didn't come here to grieve June. You didn't come here to make peace. You came here looking for a bailout. You thought if you dressed it up as legacy and said enough nice things, I'd cut you a check. I was trying to fix things." "No," I said again. "You were trying to survive another fire of your own making." He looked up at me, something between rage and disbelief twisting across his face. Then I leaned forward. "Let me show you what I brought instead." He turned the next page, Natalie's name. It was a full report. Her influencer brand. Her fake fundraising gala last year in L.A. A dozen Instagram photos taken during the event, flowers, champagne, celebrities. And one key detail, not a single dollar from ticket sales went to the nonprofit it was supposedly supporting. I hadn't meant to go after her, not at first. But then she looked at my land like it was hers. She spoke about my legacy like it was her inheritance. He shut the folder. "You've been digging into us," he said, voice low. "No," I said. "I've been preparing." The turbine outside groaned softly, a slow hum rising into the night air. Caleb sat back on the couch, eyes lost somewhere on the far wall. "Everything's falling apart," he muttered. "I know," I said. "And you're enjoying this?" "No," I replied. "I'm respecting it. The difference between justice and vengeance is paperwork." He didn't answer. Just sat there, broken open in a house he didn't know anymore, owned by a man he'd underestimated for too long. Natalie came down the stairs then. She looked between us, reading the tension instantly. "What happened?" Neither of us answered. But the folder stayed on the table, wide open like a coffin lid. He didn't speak for a full minute. Not when Natalie sat beside him. Not when she opened the folder and started flipping through it herself. And especially not when she hit the page with the Scottsdale condo deed. She blinked, once. Then again. Slower the second time. "You bought our home?" she asked. "Correction," I said. "Your former home." Caleb still hadn't moved. He just sat there, hunched forward like someone had knocked the air out of his lungs. Natalie, though, Natalie was quicker. Her mouth snapped shut. I could see her running calculations behind her eyes, toggling from panic to poise in less than a breath. "When?" she asked. 2 months ago. From the bank. It went up for auction and nobody else bid. And you didn't tell us?" Her voice had the edge of betrayal, like she'd just caught me stealing instead of the other way around. "You didn't ask." She stared at me, then turned slowly to Caleb, who was still staring at the deed like it was written in another language. "I thought we paid July," he mumbled. "You paid April," I corrected. "After that, you went dark." Autopay bounced. Notices piled up. Bank got nervous. "Why would you buy it?" he asked, finally looking up. "Because it was vulnerable. Like everything else you've touched lately." Natalie folded the folder shut. "What do you want, Ray?" I leaned back in my chair and crossed my arms. "I want to make sure this land, this home, my sister's name, and everything I've spent the last decade building doesn't get vacuumed into the sinkhole that follows you two around." "That's not fair," she snapped. "It's accurate." I slid another paper across the table. A short, clean document. 3 pages. Legal language, notarized. My lawyer's work. It had been sitting in my safe for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment. "This is what happens next," I said. "You sign this, both of you, and walk away. No press. No foreclosure on public record. No lawsuits from me." Caleb took it and read silently, mouth moving with the words. Natalie read faster. She was already shaking her head before she finished. "You want us to forfeit all claims to the property?" "Yes. Including rights of inheritance? Future claims? Anything tied to Jackson?" "Yes." Natalie looked like she wanted to throw something. Caleb looked like he might cry. "You can't be serious," she said. "I'm always serious. And if we don't?" I smiled, slow and even. "Then I make it public." Natalie's lips parted, but I cut her off. "I've already mailed copies of your gala records to the California State Charities Bureau. Certified mail. Tracking numbers. They'll be there by Monday." Her mouth snapped shut again. Caleb swallowed hard. "You mailed that?" I nodded. "And another set to the Arizona Department of Revenue. With the full ledger of missed payroll taxes from your firm. I cross-checked with your 1099s and your filings. Or rather, your lack of them." Natalie was now pale. Her hand trembled slightly on the table. One more copy went to the Phoenix Sun, I added. A reporter named Kendra Silva. She's been covering quiet financial scandals since 2018. She's hungry for a story. This is blackmail, Caleb whispered. No, I said, calm as ever. This is documentation. The guillotine is made of paper now. He dropped his face into his hands, elbows on his knees. Natalie stood up, took 2 sharp steps to the window, and just stared out into the dark. You came here, I said, standing, thinking I was the same man you walked away from 14 years ago. You thought time and silence softened me. But what you don't realize is, I've had nothing but time. And silence makes a fine place to plan. Natalie turned to face me. What about Jackson? What about him? He's your grandson. I know, I said. And I'll take care of him. She blinked at that, uncertain. You don't get to leverage him, I added. Not anymore. Caleb looked up. So what? You get everything, and we disappear. No, I said. You get your lives. Your silence. I don't drag you through court, and you don't drag Jackson down with you. He exhaled, ragged and slow. I gave him one final document, still in the folder. This is the timeline. You sign by Sunday night. My lawyer gets it Monday. Otherwise, the paper trail goes wide. Caleb didn't take it. Natalie did. She held it like it might burn her fingers, then set it carefully back down. I walked out of the room and left them there. Didn't need to watch them unravel further. Out on the porch, I lit a cigarette. First one in 3 years. The night was quiet, the wind light. One turbine spun slow and steady against the moon. Inside, I could hear nothing. Just silence. The kind that makes men choose. By morning, the temperature had dropped a good 10 degrees. The sky was the color of wet slate, and a slow, cold wind had picked up across the fields. I made breakfast the old way, cast iron skillet, real butter, thick-cut bacon, eggs over medium. June's biscuit recipe was second nature by now. I didn't cook fancy, but I cooked well. There was a time I made breakfast like this for Caleb, when he was young and still looked at me with something other than calculation. I didn't call them down. The smell did that job better than any knock on the door could. Caleb was first. His eyes were bloodshot, and the shadows under them had deepened. Natalie followed 5 minutes later, looking put together, but not fresh. There was too much makeup under her eyes and not enough in her smile. She was wound-tight, trying to keep up appearances, still clinging to the idea of control. You hungry? I asked, not looking up as I cracked another egg. No, Caleb said quietly. Coffee's fresh. He poured himself a mug, but didn't drink it. Natalie stood by the counter like she wasn't sure whether she was welcome to sit. I didn't invite her. I ate in silence. Scraping toast across my plate. Chewing slowly. Watching the wind turbine through the window, its blades turning lazily. That hum was comfort now. June used to call it the heartbeat of the land. We read the documents again last night, Natalie finally said, sliding into the seat opposite me. I nodded but didn't respond. They're thorough, she added. Of course they are. Caleb cleared his throat. You weren't bluffing. No. I thought maybe some of it was for show. Pressure tactics. I finally looked at him. Son, you spent the last 10 years talking circles around people until they handed you checks. I don't use pressure. I use precision. He stared into his coffee. You've been planning this. For a while, I said. Started about a year after the last time you ignored my letter. Natalie leaned forward. You mailed those documents? To the tax board, the state charity commission, the Phoenix Sun, and your in-laws. Her face paled. Jesus. Certified mail, I added. One set arrives Tuesday. Another is already signed for. Kendra Silva, she's a reporter out of Phoenix. Been digging into influencer scams and charity frauds for years. You're a case study. Caleb closed his eyes. You mailed all of that? What do you want? Natalie asked. I stood and walked to the drawer near the fridge. Pulled out a cream envelope, sealed with a red tab. Dropped it on the table between us. This, I said. This is what happens next. Caleb reached for it, but Natalie beat him to it. She tore it open and scanned the first page, then the second. I watched her mouth move silently as she read the legalese. It's a property transfer, she said. Correct. It severs all rights to my estate. The house, the land, the turbines, the trucking company. All of it. You want us to sign away everything? She snapped. No, I said. I want you to acknowledge that none of it was ever yours to begin with. Caleb looked up. We're your family. You disappeared when it counted. Family is more than blood. Family shows up. Natalie tapped the paper with her fingernail. And if we don't sign? Then the certified documents go through. And I will make sure every inch of your reputations is reviewed by people who don't accept legacy as an excuse. Caleb stood. You do that to your own son. I stood too. Slowly. You're not my son. Not right now. You're just a man who showed up late to a funeral and tried to carve a check from the casket. His jaw clenched. We came to make peace. No, I said. You came to avoid the consequences. Natalie sat very still. Her voice, when it came, was quiet. And if we do sign? Then I retract every document. I call off the reporter. I intercept the certified copies headed to your in-laws and the state. You disappear from my affairs, and I disappear from yours. Caleb was breathing hard now, like someone trying not to break down. And Jackson? Natalie asked suddenly. What happens to him in all of this? I pulled out a second envelope. Opened it. Set the will on the table between us. He inherits everything. In a trust. Locked until he's 25. You're cutting us out. I'm protecting what matters. Natalie picked up the will, flipped through it. You really did this. Last year. Right after your little gala fundraiser. I knew then how far gone you both were. Caleb sat again, slowly. He's our son. And that's your only leverage left, I said. But it's not enough. I've watched what you do with leverage. I won't let Jackson be another asset you burn through. He looked broken. More than before. Natalie placed her hand on his, not for comfort, but coordination. This is it then, she asked. This is the offer, I said. Clean. Private. Final. No one spoke for a long time. Outside, a crow called once and fell silent again. Finally, Caleb nodded. I'll sign. Natalie closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were sharp. Me too. I didn't thank them. I just stood and started washing my plate. Caleb's voice came once more, thin, quiet. Why Jackson? I paused, then looked over my shoulder. Because I believe he still has a chance to become something better than the two of you. That's the legacy I want. They signed. Not without hesitation. Not without one last look at each other like maybe, just maybe, they could blink twice and wake up somewhere else. But they signed. Natalie first. She read every word, probably hoping to find a loophole. Something she could weaponize later. But my lawyer had sealed this thing tighter than a vault. She signed with a pen that barely trembled, then slid the papers to Caleb. He didn't read them. He just stared. Eyes vacant, mouth flat, like he was trying to remember if this was the lowest point of his life or just another in a long string of them. He signed. The documents went back in the envelope. I sealed it without ceremony. That should have been it. But Natalie made the mistake of trying to walk away with her dignity. You know, she said, voice cool, steady, you could have just said no. You didn't have to dig up all this dirt. You didn't have to humiliate us. I poured myself a second coffee. Didn't I? She tilted her head. What kind of man does this to his own family? The kind who learns, I said. After being burned long enough, you stop giving people matches. That's dramatic. I sipped my coffee. So was lying to donors, claiming proceeds would go to pediatric cancer research, and then pocketing the cash for operating costs. Her face didn't move, but her shoulders stiffened. I have receipts, I added. Real ones. Including photos of the venue invoices you never paid and a list of vendors who filed small claims after you skipped town. That was a misunderstanding. That was fraud. Her mask cracked. Just a little. I have contacts at the state attorney's office, she said suddenly, like she was remembering she used to be feared. If you think you're going to smear my name, think again. I know how to play this game. I chuckled. You're not playing anymore. You're benched. Caleb looked up, startled. We signed. You said it was over. I said I wouldn't go public, I replied. And I won't. But you try to threaten me. Try to slander me or Jackson. I will bury you with the facts. No threats. Just exhibits. Natalie opened her mouth again. I raised a finger. Let me paint the picture, I said. Your brand is already wobbling. Sponsorships are drying up. You've started recycling photos from last year's vacation for new content. One tip to a journalist about your staged fundraiser, one audit from the wrong agency, and you're done. No more wellness partnerships. No more free skincare boxes. No more clicks, no more codes, no more curated lifestyle. You've been watching me, she said, voice brittle now. Not watching, I said. Archiving. Caleb stood, jaw tight. You made your point. Not quite, I said, setting my mug down. I'm not doing this for revenge. I'm doing it for Jackson. You can hate me for it. I expect you will. But he's going to grow up free of your debts, your image, and your games. You think you can do better? Natalie asked. You think locking his inheritance in a vault makes you a better parent than we were? No, I said. But I think he'll get to decide for himself. And that's more than you ever gave him. The wind picked up outside. A low moan through the trees. The turbine spun faster now, catching speed. Caleb walked to the window, watching it. What happens now? He asked, not looking back. You leave. Quietly. By tonight. I send my lawyer the signed copies in the morning. And then I wait. For what? For Jackson to grow up, I said. For him to find his own way. Without the weight you both tried to hang on his neck. Caleb turned, something raw in his eyes. He'll ask about this one day. I hope he does. And you'll tell him what? The truth, I said. That you showed up with smiles and empty hands. That you tried to use legacy like a crowbar. That you walked away when you couldn't crack it open. You really think you're the hero here? I stared him down. No. I'm just the last grown-up in the room. Natalie grabbed her bag. Come on, she muttered. We've got what we came for. You didn't get anything, I said. Except mercy. She paused in the doorway. You won't always have control, Ray. I smiled. I don't need control. Just clarity. She left first. He lingered. For a moment, I saw something in his eyes, guilt, maybe. Or regret. Maybe he remembered the man who used to carry him on his shoulders through the orchard. Maybe not. He left without another word. I stood at the window and watched their rental car kick up dust as it rolled down the drive, two specks shrinking against the horizon. June used to say, the best revenge is to outlive them and outthink them. Today, I'd done both. The house was quiet after they left. Too quiet. There's a stillness that comes when a storm finally passes, not peace, not relief, just silence. Like the ground doesn't trust it's over yet. That's what settled over the farmhouse. It was the silence of dust, of questions that never got asked, and answers that would never come. I spent that afternoon going room by room. June's scent still lingered on the quilt she kept folded over the back of her chair. Her glasses were on the side table, next to a half-finished crossword. She'd stopped mid-clue, 3 letters, a measure of revenge. I smiled. Act, I whispered. It fit. I walked to the desk in the study. Pulled open the bottom drawer. Inside was a locked fireproof box. I turned the key and lifted the lid. The first thing inside was my will. Rewritten a year ago. Drafted carefully. Reviewed by a lawyer who knew how to close every loophole Caleb might someday try to pry open with his slippery smile and faux contrition. I took out the second folder. It was thinner, just 2 documents inside. The trust agreement. And a letter addressed to Jackson. 10 years old now. Smart. Sensitive. Quiet. I hadn't seen him in person in nearly 3 years, but I kept tabs. His school sent newsletters. His art teacher posted a photo of him once, holding up a painting of a windmill and a tree, signed Jackson M. He didn't know it yet, but that tree stood outside my bedroom window. That windmill powered the barn where I used to rock Caleb to sleep. I'd watched his life from the sidelines, forbidden from contact, blocked from sending gifts, and ignored when I asked for calls. But I waited. And I prepared. The trust was ironclad. Every acre of land. Every turbine lease. Every asset from my logistics company. All of it went into a protected fund that no one, not Caleb, not Natalie, not even Jackson until he was of age, could touch. A professional fiduciary would manage it until he turned 25. Education, housing, healthcare, it was all covered under strict terms. I thought about the day he'd turn 18, when he'd get the first letter. Then again at 21, when he'd get another. The final one came at 25, along with full control. In that moment, he'd realize something no one else ever gave him, the benefit of the doubt. I knew it might not go the way I imagined. He might grow up bitter, poisoned by the lies his parents spun. He might believe the worst about me. But maybe, just maybe, he'd read the letter. See the deeds. Realize someone had been thinking of him the whole time, not with guilt, not with manipulation, but with intention. That was my legacy. Not control. Not revenge. Intention. I sealed the trust papers back in their envelope and slid them into the box. Then I took out a smaller one. Velvet-lined. Inside was a key, old, heavy, black iron. It belonged to the original cellar door beneath the barn. Useless now, since I'd replaced the lock, but symbolic. June always said Jackson had a caretaker's soul. I hoped she was right. I set the key aside with the letter. One day, I'd give it to him myself. If not, my lawyer would. That night, I took a call from my attorney. They signed. They did, I said. And you're sure you want to keep the trust terms? I'm not changing a thing. There was a pause on the line. Ray, this is a bold move. They could challenge it. Let them try. You've left nothing to Caleb or Natalie. Correct. Not even a token. Not even a dime. He didn't argue. He knew better. "You're setting this boy up to carry the whole weight," he said finally. "That's a lot for a young man." "I'm not setting him up to carry it," I said. "I'm setting it up so he doesn't have to drag the weight his parents left behind." The call ended. The fire burned low in the hearth. I watched the flames lick the logs and thought about the irony of it all. Caleb once said I was too cold. Too rigid. That's why he left. But it wasn't rigidity. It was structure. Something he never had the patience for. Something Jackson might appreciate one day. A wind picked up outside. The turbine spun faster. I went out to the porch, pulled June's cardigan over my shoulders, it still smelled like lavender and cedar, and sat in her rocker. The stars were out, scattered like broken glass across the night sky. He was the real heir. Not because of blood. Because of potential. Because of what could still be salvaged. That's what revenge had become, in the end. Not fire. But preservation. It was almost an afterthought, going back to the chapel. But that's how closure works sometimes. You think you're done until something unsettles you just enough to go back and make sure the door really shut behind you. I didn't tell anyone I was going. Just got in the truck, drove the 20 miles through winding two-lane roads, past the dry cornfields and the broken fence line at Miller's Hill. The same road June and I drove together the morning of her husband's funeral, years ago. I remember she wore navy blue and carried a thermos of black coffee that she didn't drink. That chapel hadn't changed since then. Same weathered stone walls, same red door with the brass handle that always stuck halfway open. The parking lot was gravel, half washed out from the last rain. No one else was there, and I liked it that way. Inside, it was cool and dim, the scent of old pew varnish and dried flower petals heavy in the air. Sunlight slanted through stained glass windows, casting fractured patches of color across the wooden floor. Without people in the room, it looked smaller. Less like a place of ceremony, more like a relic of something fading. I took a seat in the back, same pew I'd chosen during June's service. I'd sat there so I could watch without being seen. That day, I didn't cry. I didn't hug. I watched. I watched Caleb walk through the chapel like he was networking. Smile calibrated. Arms wide open. Whispering condolences with just the right tilt of his head. And Natalie, circling like a hawk, her heels silent on the stone floor, eyes tracing every architectural detail like it was a real estate listing. I watched the way they lingered near the windows, talked about legacy in hushed tones. It was a performance. All of it. No grief. Just angles. I stood and walked toward the front, where the guest book still sat. I hadn't signed it that day. I'd barely acknowledged it. But something tugged at me now. That compulsion you get when you know the curtain's closing, and you want to make sure the story ends the way it's supposed to. The book was open to a middle page, slightly curled at the edges. I flipped back. Rows of familiar names. Marlene Beckett from the Garden Club. Ronnie Langston, June's first boss from the feed store. Even little notes from the Harkness twins, "We'll miss your sweet tea, June." Heaven's lucky. I turned another page. And then I saw it. Too late, but still sorry. Caleb. It stopped me. Not because it moved me, because it confirmed everything. 9 words, written like a closing line in a script. A final attempt to rewrite his part in the story. Not to apologize. To mark his place. That entry wasn't an act of remorse. It was a tactical move. The kind you make when you're already halfway out the door but want to leave something behind, in case someone later comes looking for the truth. It was Caleb's insurance policy. His footnote. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I pulled out my phone and took a picture. Not for keepsake. For record. A timestamp. A digital fingerprint. Something I could show Jackson one day if his father ever tried to tell him he was forgiven. If Caleb ever spun a tale of reconciliation and redemption. I'd show the photo and say, he wrote this. Then he signed away everything and walked out. I flipped to the last page in the book. Blank. I picked up the pen, still tethered to its little brass chain, and wrote. You came too late. I didn't. Ray Mercer. I closed the book. The sound echoed in the empty room louder than it should have. Final. On my way out, I paused at June's grave. The soil had begun to settle. Grass crept in around the stone. Someone had left a small bouquet, faded lilacs. Probably Marlene. June would have loved that. The stone read. June Lorraine Mercer. Still here. A phrase she used all the time. Sometimes in triumph. Sometimes in resignation. But always with a dry smirk and a spark in her eye. When her arthritis got worse, she said it. When the bank nearly foreclosed on the land 15 years back, she said it again. And when Caleb stopped calling and she watched me fade into myself, she put her hand on my shoulder and whispered it like a prayer. Still here. I stood there until the wind picked up. Brushed a few leaves across the gravel path. The turbines were spinning again in the distance, faint but steady. Their rhythm soothed me now. When I got home, the first thing I did was upload the photo of Caleb's message to my encrypted drive. I labeled it with the date and location. Then I printed a hard copy, slid it into the manila folder labeled Jackson. That folder now held everything. The trust documents, the new will, letters he'd get at 18, 21, 25. And now, this photo. Proof. Not of guilt, but of context. One day, when he asks, and he will, I'll be ready to tell him the truth. The whole truth. Not just what Caleb wrote. But what he meant. And why none of it changed what came next. Snow came early that year. Thick and heavy, the kind that makes even the wind move slower. By morning, the world outside the farmhouse had turned to silence, a white hush draped over the hills, the trees, the turbine blades now spinning at a lazy, deliberate pace. The gravel driveway was buried under 2 inches, and I didn't bother clearing it. No one was coming. I woke before dawn, not from a dream or a sound, but from the sheer stillness. That kind of cold, internal knowing that today was meant for something. Something final. I brewed the coffee slow, watching the dark liquid drip down like time itself. Poured it into the same old mug I'd used since June gave it to me on my 50th birthday, faded blue ceramic with a crack near the handle. I wrapped myself in her quilt, sat at the kitchen table, and set the envelope down in front of me. Cream stock. Heavy seal. Not just a letter, this was an end. Inside. A notarized declaration formally stripping Caleb of any remaining power of attorney rights he didn't even know I'd revoked years ago. A letter to the Arizona Business Bureau, complete with exhibits documenting his past schemes, warning them of ongoing patterns of financial opacity. And a final message to Harland Brooke, Caleb's largest and most persistent creditor. That last one took the most time. I rewrote it 6 times before I landed on the right tone. No gloating. No threats. Just coordinates, a paper trail, and a suggestion, you'll find him here. Nothing inspires speed like desperation. I knew Harland would move fast. I didn't send it electronically. No email, no PDFs. I wanted it on paper, something he had to hold, open, and read. Something heavy enough to carry the weight of consequence. I sealed it with wax. Just like June used to when she wrote Christmas cards, red wax with an M stamp I found in her sewing box. A bit of drama, sure. But endings should have a little ceremony. I didn't rush. The day wasn't going anywhere, and neither was I. After breakfast, I went to the hearth. Built a fire from scratch. Laid logs with care, lit it with a match instead of the click lighter. I wanted to feel the strike, hear the ignition. This fire wasn't for warmth. It was for release. I carried the first box in from the study. Decades of photos, some with edges curled from age, others still pristine. Caleb as a boy, his missing front teeth, his Boy Scout badge ceremony, that trip to the coast when he was 12 and swore he'd become a marine biologist. He was always making promises like that. Promises built more on charm than follow-through. They all went in. One by one. Not angrily. Not hastily. Just done. Then came the letters. Drafts I'd written over the years, begging for a reconnection. Angry rants. Careful apologies. Attempts to explain my silence after his mother died. Notes I'd never mailed. Notes he never would have read. And finally, the last one. A birthday card from when he was maybe 8. On the back. I'll always take care of you. The ink had faded, but I could still read it. That one I held for a long time. Then I dropped it in. I opened a window to let the smoke out, or maybe to let something else go too. The wind was biting, but it felt clean. Honest. By noon, I'd driven to the next town over, no tracking, no cameras. Dropped the envelope at a private courier, paid cash. No return address. Just the message. Just the truth. It was out of my hands now. On the way home, I stopped by the orchard. I hadn't been there since the leaves fell, and now the bare branches reached out like fingers frozen mid-prayer. That orchard had seen everything: Caleb's first scraped knee, the day I proposed to his mother, June's laughter echoing through the trees as she picked apples with a wide-brimmed hat and a humming tune. I stood there for a while. No words. Just breath and memory. Back at the house, I poured a single glass of bourbon. Sat on the porch wrapped in June's cardigan, the one she wore when the nights got too cold but she refused to stay inside. She was always stubborn like that. Like me. The sky darkened fast. Snow still falling, fat flakes now, like time slowing down to let me catch up. Inside, everything was in order. The safe was locked. The will secured. Jackson's folder was complete. Trusts. Letters. Records. Even a photo of Caleb's guestbook entry, just in case someone someday tried to spin the story different. I'd preserved what mattered. I hadn't yelled. I hadn't raised a hand. I hadn't broken the law or sullied my name. I'd simply waited. Outlived them. Outthought them. And when it was time, I'd used the only tools I needed: patience, paper, and memory. Revenge didn't taste sweet. It wasn't a celebration. It tasted like black coffee. Bitter. But necessary. Outside, the wind rattled the last of the dry leaves off the trees. The turbines groaned, but they turned. Always turning. Always pulling energy from the air itself. Silent work. Invisible strength. I sat with my bourbon, watching the dark settle in. The fire had gone out. The ashes were cold. It was finished. There's a difference between forgiveness and forgetting, I whispered. I forgave him enough to spare the boy. But I'll never forget what he tried to take. I raised the glass to the dark. Then I set it down. And closed the door behind me.